All right, without any more delay, because you've all turned off your cell phones or turned them on silent, today we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Demick. Demick is a paleontologist and associate professor at Adelphi University, which is based in New York. And as I switch over presentations, he earned his doctoral degree at the University of Michigan studying the evolution of long-necked dinosaurs. His research takes him all around the world to visit museums and to excavate fossils, which you need a permit for. He has been excavating fossils in the Bighorn Basin with students and colleagues since 2007. Mike has published numerous articles on dinosaur evolution, including a recent cover article for Scientific American. While not working, Mike enjoys hiking in New York's Catskill Mountains with his wife and daughter. Definitely not in New York City. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Michael Demick.
All right, thank you, Corey, for that nice introduction, and thank you all for showing up for this talk. Today I'm going to focus on just one kind of dinosaur, this one, the long-necked ones, sauropods, and I'm going to convince you, I think, that they're the most interesting type of dinosaur, even though they're not really the most studied of all the different kinds. And if anything in my talk is unclear, or you want to learn more about it, I did publish an article on this talk last year in Scientific American that basically will go through the same content. So why are these animals so special? Well, on average, most groups of dinosaurs are not especially big. So if you look at this graphic right here, let's see if I can use the laser pointer. If you had a large duck-billed dinosaur, this is the largest one of those. The largest horned dinosaur, or even T-Rex, they're not as big as the biggest, let's say, mammoths, mastodons, relatives of rhinoceroses. So we think of dinosaurs as these truly iconic, tremendous, giant animals, but there were mammals that were just as big as most groups of dinosaurs, except sauropods. They are just far and away the largest animals ever to walk the earth. And they didn't get that title by a slim margin, right? They're 2, 3, 4 times heavier and maybe 4 or 5 times longer than even any other group of dinosaur. So they're especially large within this large group. Here's a different graphic that shows you even more diversity, so you can get a scale, a sense of the scale. The biggest sauropods walking on land were about as long as the biggest whales living in the ocean today. So just tremendously large, and nothing else has even come close. The closest things, as I said, would have been these woolly mammoth relatives, or maybe ancient relatives of rhinoceroses, but they're not even close. So something special was going on in the evolution of sauropod dinosaurs. So where do sauropods fit in an evolutionary sense? Well, this is a nice graphic of the dinosaur family tree, and sauropods are right over here. In terms of all the different groups of dinosaurs, we have the horned dinosaurs like the famous Triceratops, the dome-headed dinosaurs like Pachycephalosaurus, the duck-billed dinosaurs like hadrosaurs, all the armored dinosaurs, Ankylosaurus, Stegosaurus, and then sauropods, the long-necked, largest ones, and their precursors, the prosauropods, are very closely related to this group, maybe the most famous and the most heavily studied group of all, the theropod dinosaurs, the mostly carnivorous bipedal ones that include things like T-Rex, Allosaurus, Velociraptor, and they include birds, which are still with us today. So we'll see through the talk that sauropods actually have some strange bird-like features in their anatomy and their biology. So here's a little cast of characters showing just the differences in body plan, in size, and shape of a lot of different sauropods. So there's a little parent and child there for scale, as well as the largest known mammoth, largest known rhino relative, largest known duck-billed dinosaur, and then a T-Rex also for scale. You can see that not all sauropods are built alike. Some had really, really long necks and short tails. Some had really, really short necks and long tails. Some had really long forelimbs, really short hind limbs, and vice versa. Some had them equal. So they had different shapes and sizes. All the individuals here are adults, and so you can see some are truly titanic, right, getting up to over 100 feet long, maybe weighing 100,000 pounds or more. And some are more modest, even as adults, so maybe 20 or 30 feet long. So it's not that it's just one critter out there. There's actually hundreds of sauropod species, and they do come in all different shapes and sizes. One of the main strange bird-like things about them is that they had air-filled bones, just like a bird. Not their limb bones, right, that had to carry those 100,000 pounds, but their neck bones especially, all the bones down their back, parts of their pelvis, parts of their shoulder, and in some even down to the tip of the tail. You have these really light air-filled bones. So if you've ever held a bird or seen bird bones, you know that a lot of them are full of air. These cross-sections here are from CAT scans of fossils, and you can see just how similar they are to bird bones in some cases. They have that honeycomb texture inside. So even though some of these individual bones might be 3 feet long, in life, maybe 80% of that was air. So it probably would have been quite light to pick up if you could find one that was unfossilized somehow. So in some sense, they got bigger by cheating, right? They aren't dense as a mammal, which is basically the density of water. Overall, they had large air sacs and large lungs. We can see the impressions of the air sacs on the insides of the ribs, for example, so we know that that even filled parts of the ribs. So in life, it would look more like something like this or like this, where a large part of the inside of the animal was actually filled with air. So it would reduce that density by about 10% overall. So that's one way to get bigger without needing much thicker bones. Another bird-like or unusual aspect of their biology is that they all hatched from eggs, just like all dinosaurs. So no dinosaur gave live birth. They all hatched from eggs, just like their relatives crocodiles or their descendants, the birds. So not only are sauropods special because they're by far the largest animals ever to walk on land, they also are one of the animals that had the most growing to do of any animal. So if you found a sauropod egg, they're not tremendously large. So one thing about eggshell is it's eggshell. There's not titanium eggs out there in the fossil record or anything. So it's fragile. You know, it can be a bit thicker, but it's never going to get very strong. So the largest sauropod eggs are only about the size of maybe a soccer ball or a grapefruit for some of them. Some bird eggs, like elephant bird eggs or ostrich eggs, are larger than sauropod eggs. So this little guy would have hatched and been maybe 1 foot long and then had to grow to be 120 feet long, right? So that's very different than a mammal life history, where when we're born, we might be a foot or so long, and then we grow to be 5 or 6 feet long. So we increase 5 or 6 fold. This has to increase over 100 fold. So really unusual biology. Here you can see a silhouette of an adult and a 1-year-old sauropod. So really unusual animals for those two reasons: the air-filled bones that they share with birds and hatching from eggs. As I said, not every sauropod is gigantic. So here you can see an illustration from that Scientific American article, and you can see different sized sauropods on the landscape. Oftentimes in one ecosystem, there would have been 4, 5, or 6 species sharing that ecosystem. So you had little ones, big ones, different shaped heads, different shaped teeth. So there was ecological diversity. And again, some of them got quite small, maybe only 15 feet long or so. So it probably would have weighed, with being air-filled, would have weighed maybe as much as a bison for some of them. So they weren't all tremendously large. Here's some images to show you some of that ecological diversity that I just mentioned. Their heads were all different shapes and sizes. Some had long horse-like heads, like you can see in the upper left. That's Diplodocus. Some had more stout, almost spherical heads, like on the upper right, Camarasaurus. Some had really strange shovel-like faces, Nigersaurus from Africa in the lower left. and then everything in between, like Jobaria in the lower right. Their teeth also varied a lot in shape and size. So you can see in a couple of them, they're pencil-like teeth. These really small pencil-like teeth here, or even smaller in Nigersaurus there, to these long, almost spoon-like teeth, to these really blunt peg-like teeth. So they did have a lot of diversity in their skull shape, in their tooth shape, and what that tells us is that they ate different things, right? So they all ate plants, but they probably specialized on different plants at different browsing heights across the landscape. So it's not one size fits all. So the question remains, how did they get so big, and what made them special to get so big? I talked about some of the features, but it's when I set out on this research project several years ago, no one had hit on an answer of why these animals were so special and what's the feature that let them get so big. That's very strange because in evolution, it's very, very common to have something called convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is the evolution of the same feature or behavior multiple times in different groups. So the classic example is powered flight or wings. You can see on this old schematic, evolved at least 3 times in vertebrates, many more times in insects. You can see that they evolved wings, but each came from a different lineage. So pterodactyls from really ancient reptiles, bats evolved from mouse-like mammals, and birds, as we said earlier, evolved from something that looked like T-Rex or Velociraptor. So it's the same but different. We can see that the wings are made up of different bones, and that's convergent evolution. To throw that on an evolutionary tree, to give you a different example, we can see that another complex feature, gliding, not powered flight, even that evolved multiple times. In fact, evolved many, many times in the history of life. But here's one example where in marsupials it's evolved, in the sugar glider, and then independently this flying squirrel within placental mammals evolved, right? So we have very complex things like powered flight evolving 3 times, gliding evolving many, many times. Secondarily, aquatic behavior or lifestyles have evolved many, many, many times, and you get evolution just hits on the same features evolving over and over. So for example, this ichthyosaur here would have evolved from something that would look more or less like a monitor lizard or an iguana, and evolution turned it into this. So something that gave live birth, which we know from lots of fossils, something with a streamlined body with paddles, flippers, large orbits, right? Good eyesight. Mammals, the same thing. So this dolphin would have evolved from something that would have looked like a very small cow or cat, and live birth, same streamlined body, flippers, right? All these features evolved over and over, and this is just one example. Other complex things that have evolved multiple times are complex eyes, a compound eye. So for example, we vertebrates have complex eyes where there's a lens that changes shape and focuses light on the back of the eye on the retina, and then that's collected and sent to the brain. And cephalopods, like octopi, also involved complex eyes. I mean, that's really a complicated thing to come up in evolution. But again, the same but different. Different types of teeth and feeding have evolved multiple times. So these are 4 saber-toothed tigers, you could say, but they all evolved independently from different lineages on different continents and different times and places. So when evolution hits on something, it does it again and again, right? Bipedalism, my last example here, walking on 2 legs instead of 4, that evolved in our lineage as well as in birds, right? So all these complex things from powered flight, gliding, living in the water, complex eyes, saber teeth, bipedalism, right? They all evolved more than once despite their complexity on different continents, different times, different places. So convergence is expected in evolution. Usually when there's a niche, it's filled more than once over time. But not so with sauropods, and that always puzzled me. Why were there no 100-foot-long duck-billed dinosaurs or horned dinosaurs? Why are there no 100-foot-long T-Rexes no 100 feet tall giraffes, right? Why is it just this group that evolved to its impressive sizes? So I really hit on this, or was drawn to this idea during my doctoral studies, and really wanted to dig in and find the answer, because it's really unusual for there not to be convergent evolution. Luckily for me, the sauropod fossil record is really good. I mean, you can go to any museum across the West. They probably have a sauropod bone or two. This is a map from what's called the Paleobiology Database. It's a nice publicly funded, federally funded, supported database where scientists can enter different fossil finds from museum catalogs and museum libraries. Each dot is just a place where a sauropod has been found. So not a skeleton, but maybe one bone, maybe 1,000 bones, just the site. And you can see across the whole world there's over 2,500 places. If I had another map earlier, but if I put all the dinosaur discoveries, we'd be over 10,000 places around the world. But 2,500 of those for sauropods. The colors represent different times from the Jurassic and the Cretaceous periods. And you can see even in some very far-flung places like Antarctica, the tip of South America, parts of New Zealand, and really all across the world they've been found. So that really nice fossil record lets us study evolution and how these animals evolved. Luckily, also, the rate of fossil discovery has been increasing over time. So this is going to be a plot with the x-axis at the bottom showing year of discovery up until about today, about 2020 it'll end, starting with the dinosaur rush out west in the 1800s. And I'll just tally up the cumulative number of species here. So this is what those collecting curves look like. You can see the sauropods, the ones we're interested in red, the armored dinosaurs here in black, and then the carnivorous ones in white. And you can see all of them are exponentially increasing, where for each group we know of about 300 or 400 species so far. So luckily, the golden age of fossil discovery is today. We have new species pretty much every month. Usually when I tell people I'm a paleontologist, one of the main reactions I get is, well, didn't they dig everything up in the 1800s? But actually, this is the best time to be studying these kind of critters because everyone got really interested in them. Once scientists got really interested in them in the 1970s when evolutionary biologists linked birds to dinosaurs and we had an idea of where birds came from. And then the popularity of movies like Jurassic Park and other TV shows really ratcheted up interest in paleontology in general. So it's a great time to study dinosaurs for any of the kids in the audience if you ever want to make a career out of this. There's plenty to do, lots to study. Now, in that last part of the graph, so I did my PhD around 2005 to 2010. You can see it was actually, it's an exciting time to study something, but it's actually really hard to keep up as well. And if you follow any kind of paleontology in the news, like read the science section of your newspaper, you'll see stories about new discoveries all the time. When I started to learn about these animals, I'd see lots of headlines like this. Right, gargantuan star lizard was one of the last and largest dinosaurs of its kind. So this is from earlier this year, just in January. Enormous dinosaur dubbed Shiva the Destroyer is one of the biggest discovered. So that one's from April of this year. We thought we knew the biggest dinosaur ever, but something else might have stolen its thunder. I think that's from maybe 2020. Did scientists just unveil the biggest dinosaur of all time? The jury's still out. Paleontologists may have found the biggest dinosaur of all time. That's 2021. Supersaurus might be the longest dinosaur that ever lived. That's from right here in Wyoming, from 2021. A much earlier one, gigantic, 122 million-year-old dinosaur discovery is the largest ever found. Patagotitan, new study describes the biggest dinosaur ever. A titanosaur that weighed 75 tons was the biggest dinosaur ever. And I kept seeing this, right, these headlines over and over. I could probably fill the rest of this talk with headlines. You see this pretty often, this claim like the biggest dinosaur ever, the biggest dinosaur ever. I'm going to talk about how we can actually, well, that got me interested in how can we actually measure and compare these things? Because the fossil record, as good as it is and as growing as it is, it's incomplete, right? So you might have an arm of one animal, you might have the tail of another animal, the neck of a third. How do you compare all those different things and actually say what's the biggest and what's the average, etc.? Oh, I even left one off. Newly discovered dinosaur takes the title of largest terrestrial animal. So these can't all be right? There has to be one largest terrestrial animal, but you see this in the news coming up over and over. Now, each time I'd see one of these stories, I'd go into the scientific literature and read the journal article associated with it, and it would have tables of measurements of all the different bones or pictures of the bones, and I'd see them and I'd kind of pause. So I grew up near New York City, like Corey mentioned, and so I grew up going to the American Museum of Natural History, pictured here. They have this room in the basement called the Big Bone Room, where you need a forklift and help to get any of the individual bones down. They're on pallets. It's a really big room, maybe twice as big as this room, and that's where they keep the big bones. Many, if not, I'd say more than half of these were probably found in Wyoming or Colorado in the dinosaur gold rush in the 1800s. You can see just how tremendously huge some of these are. Like this is a single neck vertebra. These are parts of the backbone, parts of the tail. And I'd been to this room and I was thinking, well, I saw these headlines, but I've been here and these are really big. These are like about the same size, more or less. I didn't measure anything or try to do detailed comparisons, but I always came back to this and thought, like, some of the bones in this big bone room are as big as these that are being claimed to be the number one giant dinosaur in all of this media. So I thought, how can I actually answer this question? How big was the biggest one? What's the average size even? And how did this feature evolve? Did sauropods just evolve gigantic size once and then speciate, radiate at giant size? Or did they evolve gigantic body size over and over and over? So I started making comparisons. I already knew that there was a lot of ecological diversity, right? There's ones with long necks, short tails, short necks, long tails, different shaped heads, different shaped teeth. Some had bodies that were more directed upwards, so they probably fed towards the tops of trees. Some had really low slung shoulders with heads directed downwards. Maybe they foraged on aquatic plants or things like that. But I wanted to compare them with this fragmentary record. So rather than going with body length or height or something like that, with all these things of different shape, it's better to compare weight or body mass. Body mass is a nice biological feature because it's really comparable among organisms. So your mass or your weight is correlated to your metabolism, right? How much energy you use, how fast you grow, how you reproduce, and it also determines what you eat and what eats you, right? So if you're big, you can reach the tops of trees, right? Avoid predators. If you're tiny, maybe you can hide from predators, right? So body mass or weight is a good feature to compare. Now, how do you weigh a dinosaur, right? We just have some of the bones. Well, there's two ways, and luckily when you employ them on the same dinosaur specimen, you get a similar answer. Way number one is if you have a complete enough skeleton, you can scan the bones with LiDAR, or now there's apps on your iPhone. You just scan the bones, make a 3D model, and then add flesh around that model with computer software. And then if you estimate the density, you can get the mass or the weight. So you make a 3D model and just extrapolate the volume from that. That's tough to do because, as I said, sometimes you just find an arm, sometimes you just find a head. You don't have the whole skeleton. So there would be a lot of guesswork if we tried to do that across all 300 or so species of sauropod dinosaurs. Instead, what you can do is take a clue from engineering, and we know that the cross-sectional area of a beam is proportional to the weight that it holds, right? So for example, if you look at these columns of the Parthenon, right, their thickness has to be thick enough to hold up the roof or what's left of it. And in the same way, if we look at the cross-sectional area of the bones holding up a dinosaur or any animal, then we can estimate the weight of that animal. So in other words, bones are just the right size for the weight of the animal, And luckily, there's a universal relationship across different animals. So if you find any leg bone in the fossil record, you can get a good idea of the body mass or the weight of that animal. So that's really great because we have this fragmentary fossil record, and now we can estimate body mass really easily across several hundred of those species. Easily once we dig them up. So these are some pictures of my team, or various teams, and Corey helping out. So we've excavated in different areas where we want to find sauropod dinosaurs in particular. It's a lot of work because they're big. Here you can see over in a quarry over by Lovell, we can see one tail vertebra, and then this is one of the forearm bones, the radius of one of these sauropod dinosaurs. Here we are quarrying over by Billings. So we do travel around the basin and try to find these animals in particular for this study. A lot easier, though, is just to go to museums where they're already dug up for you. You know, you can get a coffee, sit in air conditioning. It's really nice. Maybe not as exciting, but yeah, there are thousands, if not, tens of thousands of bones in museums around the world. I think Corey can correct me, but I think the general stat is that natural history museums usually have 1% of what they have on display. So you're looking at the other 99%. You know, so it's nice. I get to visit places like the Field Museum in Chicago, has a lot of these sauropods. This is a museum down in Price, Utah. If you've been there, it's a great place. But you spend a lot of days opening and closing cabinets like this, looking through things. So it's fun archival work. So we get our data in two ways. One, going out to the field, getting bones specifically to measure, and then going to museums as well. So with all that, I was able to build my data set of sauropod body weight. So I'm going to show you some of the data now. So on this plot, we're again looking at time on the x-axis, but it's in millions of years, so geologic time, all the way back to the origin of dinosaurs about 230 million years ago, when sauropods originated too, until their extinction from the asteroid impact about 65 million years. So time goes this way, from 230 million to 65 million. And then body mass, or weight, is going to be on the y-axis with really, really heavy giant things at the top and more modest, like bison-sized things towards the bottom. We want to use a proportional scale to compare these, not an absolute scale, so it's a logarithmic scale. But you don't need to know the numbers. Let's see how it plots up. So each dot on here represents one species. I could do it for about 200. And you can see a couple interesting patterns through time. We can see that they increase in body mass, the maximum body mass, through the the first half of their evolution, and then things sort of plateau for the rest of the time. You can also see some of the unevenness of the fossil record. This really, really dense slice where we have all these sauropods, that's basically thanks to Wyoming with the Morrison Formation. That's a famous formation, especially for its long-necked sauropod dinosaurs. So this is our overall pattern, which I thought was interesting, to start out kind of small, maybe the size of a small elephant, ratcheting up and then plateauing. I could finally answer my question about what's the average sauropod weigh. It weighed about 16,000 kilograms or 35,000 pounds, which surprised me because that's actually less heavy than the largest mammals or other dinosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs. So that was a surprise. The average sauropod is actually smaller than the biggest mammal or the biggest dinosaur. Didn't expect that. But what I really wanted to answer was, how many times did this evolve, right? So is it that this is one lineage and they just got big really quick and then some evolved back to be small? Did they mostly stay small and then every time a big one evolved, it evolved independently? That's what I needed to know. I also needed a good threshold for what defines giant, right, in my mind. And I can't just pick a number. I wanted a biologically meaningful metric. So I thought, well, let's say what's the next biggest thing? The biggest mammoth? Well, that weighed about 25,000 kilograms, so we'll put a line there. And what I really want to know is, in evolution, how many times did these ones, bigger than the largest mammal or anything else to walk on land, how many times did those 30 or 40 evolve. So to do that, we need to map the evolutionary tree, the family history of these animals onto this chart. So if we connect the dots, we would see, okay, well this one here evolved to be the largest animal of all time independently, right? It crossed that line from small to big. So what I wanted to do was tally up the number of times. So I did that. I combed the literature and got a big evolutionary tree together to connect all these dots together. And I'll show you the results of that on the next slide. So this is just kind of a prettier diagram where we're again looking at time on the x-axis from around 230 to 65, and then that body mass on the y-axis. And I put some other animals here for context. So T-Rex here, the largest known T-Rex specimen right there, the largest known duck-billed dinosaur, the largest rhino relative, and then our mammal winner, the largest mammoth. And this is what the pattern looked like, and I was really surprised. Each of the lines that are colored in is one lineage that crossed that boundary. So it went from below to above if the line is colored in. Every other line is one that didn't cross that boundary. So a few interesting patterns emerge. First, they did it 36 times. Sauropods didn't just evolve to be the largest animals of all time once. They actually did it 36 times that we know of. They are all different colors because these represent different families or different types of dinosaurs. So for example, the light blue ones would be related to Diplodocus, or the orange ones related to Camarasaurus, these related to Titanosaurs. So they did it in different families, those ones with different head shapes and tooth shapes. So that was very surprising. And the number of times they decreased their evolutionary size was also surprising. So basically, you can see that same curve of increasing in size and then plateauing, but within that, there's a lot of evolution going on from small to big over and over and over. Now that we've done the how, what, why, how, what, and where, we can think of the why. So what is special about these 36 that these all don't have? That's my next question, right? Why did they get so much bigger than the biggest mammal, and why didn't the other ones? So I started looking back into all those evolutionary features that I told you about earlier. Was it the air-filled bones? Well, no, unfortunately. So they evolved these air-filled bones very early on in their evolutionary history and basically never looked back. So they just got more and more air-filled as time went on. So they did get lighter for their size, but it's not the case that, for example, all of these are air-filled and all of these are not. And in fact, some of the most air-filled ones are some of the smallest ones towards the end of the dinosaur era. So that doesn't make any sense at all. Then I tried to look at, well, maybe their body plan, body shape, maybe that could explain some of it. But again, these are different families. So the different cast of characters here across the top correspond to the different colors on the diagram. And you can see it's not that all the ones with really long tails got big or all the ones with really low forearms got big. They're all different shapes, the ones that got truly, truly massive. Then I turned to maybe their skull shape or their tooth shape. Is it the ones that only ate this kind of plants that got tremendously large? And again, no. So you find everything. Things with really squat peg-like teeth get gigantic. Things with horse-like skulls and pencil-like teeth, they also get gigantic. Nothing special there either. So there is nothing biologically special about the largest animals of all time, which is strange. Or there is, and we don't understand it yet. Maybe we just need to study it a little bit more. But it's a problem that we've been trying to work at in my research lab and try to understand in a little bit more detail. In other words, the features that seem to let sauropods get big all evolved very early on in their evolutionary history, and it let them get big, but each time was an independent case. So cases of convergent evolution to that tremendous large body size that must have been due to things that were local ecological factors. So we'd have to study each case in detail to understand things like food availability, predation, growth, things like that. So for now, there's no unifying theory as to why these animals exceeded the body mass of every other terrestrial animal, but we're getting a little closer with each day. One special thing about them is that, and this unites the whole group, is that that long neck would have allowed them to be very energetically efficient in gathering food. So this is called what we call a feeding envelope. So it's how big of an area, if you just stand in one place, can you reach and gather food? So a very energy efficient way of gathering food. That way you can devote that energy to growth rather than movement. So that's one idea, that these long necks allowed that. The funny teeth of sauropods didn't occlude with each other. They didn't connect, so they couldn't chew. They were basically just little pegs designed for chomping down on plant matter and pulling that into the mouth. They would have then swallowed that and then fermented it or digested it in their very voluminous rib cages. So one feature that might have helped them is not chewing, right? If you don't spend time chewing and then you have a small head, then you can have a tremendously long neck, and so you don't have to move to get all your food for the next couple of hours. That's one idea. It is interesting, though, that the other largest animals of all time also don't chew, and they also just sort of get food in as fast as they can while coasting along. So that's one interesting similarity between the largest whales and the largest terrestrial animals. So still a lot more to do to understand this puzzle, this problem, but it is shocking that these dinosaurs did get that title of largest 36 times independently. And so in some way, those news articles were all true in the end, because they just kept evolving that large body size over and over, and something about this body plan really worked for them in doing that. So I'd like to thank my funders for all this research, and especially all the field assistants, some of which are here in the audience today, since we're out here for another week or so, digging up north of Cody and over by Lovell as well, hoping to find more of these and other animals. And I want to thank all of you for coming and for your attention, and I'll take any questions. Okay. Yeah, so the question was, where is their mass really concentrated? So they did have these big lungs, air sacs throughout their chest cavities, but no air sacs into the legs. So those would have been very robust.
What's the ratio of weight in the leg versus
That would depend on the individual or the species, right? Because they're all different shapes. So in some of them, like Brachiosaurus, which is over here. Can you see my cursor? No. Right, so Brachiosaurus, things like this, means armed lizard, and because it has these really long forelimbs, so there would have been more weight in that one. Question? So since their bones were filled with air, did that help them run faster is the question. They wouldn't have run. They have actually a good fossil footprint record for this kind of animal. That's also how we know that, well, one of the reasons we know they walked on land rather than inhabited the water. You can find their footprints all over the place. From the spacing of footprints, you can get a good estimate of speed, and there's no examples of running for these animals, but maybe we just haven't found that yet. Yes?
How many years did it take them to evolve from one foot to the other?
So their growth is known through a field called histology or paleo-histology. What's nice is you can cut open certain bones, like ribs are especially good in these, and they'll have rings, just like tree rings. And so you can count up the individual age of the animal, and then the spacing of the rings will tell you how long they took or how fast they grew. These animals, they lived on the order of, again, it varies from species to species, but 20, 30 years, they actually grew at mammal-like paces. So if you had a bison, for example, it grows to adult size in several years, just keep doing that for 30 years and you get to one of these. Yes?
If the colored lines that cross over at that point, and that's what the evolution happened.
So there's a few up here. The question is, if these colorful lines mean they crossed and these gray ones mean they didn't, what are these lines up here? So I should have said, if they're colored in, it means they crossed from below to above. There are a couple that are down here that do cross from above to below, but it's really rare. These few up here, these are ones that started big and got bigger. So you have one group actually only that split into several species over the mammalian maximum body mass. So it is interesting because most of their evolution took place in this area where you see all the branching, and only once did they split into several species above that limit. No. Maybe someday.
How complete of a picture, in terms of representation, percent representation, do we think we have of species history in dinosaurs? That's a really broad, loaded question.
Yeah, so how complete of a picture do we have in terms of dinosaur evolution? There are different ways to estimate that people have done. I mean, you can look at this map and you can see patches that there aren't dots in. A lot of that has to do with ground cover, right? So there's basically no sauropods in Canada because there's not a lot of sediment of the right age, especially over here, because of the ice sheets in the last ice ages that would have ground away a lot of that sediment. Or, deep in the Amazon rainforest, deserts, places like that. Some places are underexplored, but some places just don't preserve the right kind of sediment to have them. I don't think we really have a good handle on how good the fossil record will be in the future. Luckily, it's exponentially increasing for now. Yes?
Did these critters use gastroliths to chew with?
Yeah, that's a controversial idea. The question is, do these animals use gastroliths? So gastroliths, like lots of birds ingest stones to help with digestion. Lots of groups of dinosaurs did. So if we go back to this family tree in the beginning, wherever that was. Yeah, we do find examples of gastroliths scattered throughout the family tree. It's controversial in these animals. They're very, very few. They're so big, there's very few where you actually find the rib cage intact. Hardly any, basically. Because to bury one of these, you need such a massive landslide or whatever kind of deposit. Something is going to be disarticulated, or a carnivore or a scavenger is going to move something. So if you find a pile of stones while you're digging them and it's not dead middle of that rib cage, and you have good documentation, it's very controversial. Scattered throughout some of the formations out here, like the Morrison Formation, there are polished zones, just scattered, so not really associated with a dinosaur in particular, but you can grind up those stones and look at the individual crystals and get a fingerprint of how old is each crystal in that stone, or other geochemical indicators. And there are stones here in the Bighorn Basin that are fingerprinted to Wisconsin. Right? There's no rivers that could move a stone that direction that we know of since that time. So the hypothesis is that, maybe these animals had long migratory paths, 1,000 miles or more, that would have moved those stones here. But as I said, it's really controversial, new ideas. It would be wonderful to find one of these with a really intact rib cage and just excavate it very, very carefully. Unfortunately, in the gold rush in the 1800s of dinosaur bones, right, as always, scientists are pressed for funding and time, and so the ribs often got left behind. They would focus on getting the head or the neck or what's impressive to put in the museum, right? So a lot of ribs just never got collected.
Question from the online audience. When did you begin learning about dinosaurs? Kind of what was your trajectory, what ignited it, and then how did you go from point A to point B?
Sure. So I got interested in dinosaurs as a little kid, like most people do. I was lucky enough to participate in the excavation of a mastodon in high school. It was discovered like 5 minutes from my high school. So I worked on that for a summer, and I really enjoyed that. Went to college, didn't think I was going to do that. I thought I was going to study physics. and realized I liked being outside more than that would have allowed me to do. So I wanted to do some kind of science that was outside. I thought maybe ecology or something like that. And then I thought back to that high school experience of digging, and I thought I should try a paleontology class, and really, really liked it. Yes? Not in these animals, not in sauropods. You do find lots of skin impressions, but they're just that. They're just impressions, so we know they're pebbly, scaly skin. In some other groups, like some of the early relatives of Triceratops, there are examples of animals that died in lakes or ponds, and you can get at least the pattern. So we know that some were spotted in certain areas or had stripes in certain areas. But as to the actual color, no, not really. For the feathered dinosaurs that gave rise to birds, you can also get some idea of the coloring and pattern. But yeah, no. So all of the representations are very artistic. Yeah. Yes.
Massive size, what is the mechanism you think is body temperature control?
Yeah. So this, I should have mentioned that earlier, but the air sac system would have served other purposes than just lightening the load. There's a debate as to whether they were warm-blooded like mammals or more cold-blooded. Their problem would have been losing or getting rid of heat, right? They didn't have big elephant ears or any other kind of mechanism to lose heat. But the air sacs inside would have served as a giant surface area radiator to get rid of a lot of that heat. Another problem, if this was a mammal with a neck that long, we're talking like 30, 40-foot neck, you get into a problem called the tracheal dead space, right? So that's why you can't go snorkeling by just taking a tube and walking to the bottom of a lake, right? You can't move that much air in and out of the tube because your lungs aren't big enough. But because these animals had bird-like lungs, it's not like an accordion or a bellows. It's actually flowing the air through with each breath, in and out, just like a bird. So 2 other ways that helped them get so large. Yes?
Thinking of driving forces, did they get larger and larger because their peers were getting larger and they needed to be able to get further? Or was there a correlation between the size of the predators and the growth of the predators?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, is there a correlation between the size of the predator and the sauropod in each ecosystem, and what could have driven that? There's only a few examples where we have a good handle on how fast they grew and what they ate in every detail of the ecosystem. We do know, for example, that some of those duck-billed dinosaurs, they would outgrow the predators. They would grow really fast to get bigger, faster than the predator. I guess that would be a good next step, is trying to correlate the size of these with the size of the predator in each ecosystem, but I don't believe that that's been done yet. Yes? Sure. Sorry, I can't hear you.
You hand this over to that young man.
On this slide where it shows all the dinosaur families, it all goes to that one first line. Is that like one first dinosaur?
So that's right. Oh, you mean there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would represent the origin of Dinosauria back in the Triassic period, about 230 million years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
How close to level is the site you mentioned?
I'm not at liberty to say, but not close. Unfortunately not. Yes.
Why was it Brontosaurus? Why was that name changed to Brachiosaurus?
Yeah, so there's Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus. Basically, they couldn't tell if the body and the head of one went together. And in taxonomy and naming species, either fossils or today, it's first there wins. So if you name something first, that's the name, even if there's a better skeleton, a better specimen later on. So it's a debate back and forth as to the validity of that.
Question from a person online is, how could they get involved? You mentioned that you had an opportunity to dig in high school.
Yeah.
Are there ways for members of the public to legally partake in a dig site, and how would they go about finding out?
Yeah, there's several museums that run paleontology digs that you can go to across the country, even in New Jersey. Like, there's places all over. So if you just, I would look up your local museum and see if they offer anything. Thermopolis has some, I know, down in, where is that one? Down at the, like, central Utah, there's a dig that you can go to. So some of them you pay, sort of like going, taking a class. You can get a certificate for some of them, but I would definitely start with local museums.
Another person wants to know if you're going to give more talks because they really enjoyed this.
Well, if you'll have me back next year, sure.
Just a quick disclaimer, and Dr. Demick can elaborate on this as well, but some people may be asking why can't I accompany to a dig site? Why can't I go out and dig? And the short answer there is there's a lot of sensitivity around the sites. And if a lot of that was just open to the general public without the expertise, as you can imagine, the physical location, the orientation of these specimens in the field matters. That data is really important. And as soon as that's disturbed, that loses value to the scientific community. And research that's done in museums, research that's done through academia, that's incredibly valuable to have that information. As soon as it's lost, our ability to have those data contribute to society in a meaningful way begins to degrade. And so there's a lot of protection around that to make sure that the people who are actively working and disturbing these areas are doing so in an ethical way, that they're not privatizing that public lands. These are public resources. The research is made available in a format that is accessible to people. And when that starts to get investigated to an intense degree by members of the public, that can fall into the wrong hands and be pilfered and plundered, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
And most fossils are, like if I go to my, let's see if I go to my field pictures, most fossils, when they're excavated, they are incredibly fragile. So you can even kind of see in these pictures in the lower left, the darker color surrounding the bones. So in a lot of cases, there's groundwater. It's not soaking wet, but there's some humidity around that bone, and as soon as you expose it to the air, it starts to dehydrate. It's losing that water in the hot sun in the desert, and it'll just turn to powder if you don't take care of it. So we have specialized adhesives and ways of consolidating things and making sure that they don't fall apart.
Excellent. If there's no more questions, thank you, Dr. Demick, for your time.
Thanks.